Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping, the official podcast of MarvelSnapZone.com. Don't have a ton to say before we jump into today's episode. One thing I did want to mention, I actually mentioned a little bit in the episode, is that if you are into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you enjoy the MCU, movie tickets for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania just went on sale this week. So if you're hoping to go see that opening weekend, make sure to grab your tickets soon before all of the good seats are gone. I'm excited to see it, and I'm excited to share my thoughts on it after I see the movie. We have another great episode today. We're going to be talking new card, new location, as well as a deck breakdown, which is something we haven't done in a little while. So excited to hear your thoughts on that. If there are specific topics that you would like to have us discuss with the guests on the podcast, please let me know either on the Marvel Snap Zone Discord. We have a channel for episode discussion and episode questions, as well as on Twitter at can't_stop_snap. Would love to hear the topics that you all would love to hear covered in addition to the new cards and locations, so that we can have interesting conversations that all of you want to hear week to week. With all that being said, and without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping, the official podcast of MarvelSnapZone.com. And we have another great episode for you this week. We have a couple of topics. As always, we're going to break down new card, new location, and we're going to do something a little new. And I'll let you wait on that to find out what that is until we get to that part of the episode. But I am joined by another first-time guest and fellow Marvel Snap Zone contributor, SafetyBlade. SafetyBlade, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. How you going?
I was telling SafetyBlade before we started recording, this is the farthest, the farthest east from where I'm recording at that we've had on the podcast. So I think we're a 17 hours difference in time zone. So we've set a new record here. So that's kind of fun. But before we jump into the topics today, SafetyBlade, I would love to give you just a second to introduce yourself to the listeners. Maybe they've seen some of your stuff on Twitter, some of your stuff on Marvel Snap Zone, but just love to give you a chance to introduce yourself, your background in gaming, your background with Marvel Snap and other card games, and what you're doing for Marvel Snap Zone.
Certainly. So yes, I'm down here in Melbourne, Australia. So yes, like I said, a very long way away from you. But my background's probably a little bit different to some people's. But I just always liked card games when I was younger. Used to obviously do the Pokemon thing, the Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff like that when I was young in my teens and early childhood. I could honestly say I never was able to really afford to be really engaged with it. So later on in life, when I found Hearthstone, it was really just grabbed me immediately. It was the whole card game, thinking about these sort of problems and engaging with these games has always been a thing I've enjoyed. Drifted away from it for a long time and went back around the Battlegrounds time to Hearthstone and went a strange route of playing Battlegrounds and then going back into Standard instead. And then time ended up over in the Wild community because just enjoyed it. It was faster, which is a theme. You may realize why I like Marvel Snap more now. I also got heavily into Mercenaries for a long time, which is where a lot of my Twitter account started, because I have been a mobile gamer for a while, because I've had children for a long time, and gacha games are a staple in mobile gaming, and there's a lot of conversation around that currently, isn't there? So, but yes. Marvel Snap kind of has a bit of both. And as soon as it was announced, for me, it wasn't even the Ben Brode thing. It was just, it's a Marvel property. I'm a massive Marvel fanboy. I've read far too much of it, and I love card games. So, and two things just combined. And the 12-card deck, I really like. I like the locations change it, even though there's a few specific locations which should be deleted immediately.
Amen.
So, and delete Subterranea. I'm on.
I'm on the delete Subterranea train. Believe me.
That is the worst thing. Anyway, anyone who's engaged with me for more than 5 minutes know how much I dislike that location. And yeah, like I was going to engage with it to some degree regardless. So I was pleasantly surprised when I got the game around the time that Wave was released. That it's just amazing. The gameplay is amazing. It grips you. You can engage with it at multiple different levels. The time commitment in particular is amazing. Like, you don't actually, like, as much as there's all this conversation around it, the actual time commitment to keep up with this game compared to being a full free-to-play player in other games is harder. Now, I'm not free-to-play, but just to be clear, that's how I see it. And yeah, so it's gripped me, and it's stuck with it, and started building decks and posting stuff, and now I contribute with Marvel Snap Zone weekly with the location articles and some of the deck guides, and join me over on Twitter, ping me whenever you want, and you'll see there's I try to constantly put out different decks of varying levels of success. Some are really good and trying to be meta contenders, some are there for fun. I try to call it out when I do that. Yeah, I just like the game and love deck building, so that's why I'm still here, and I don't see myself moving away from this to some degree going forward at this stage.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the introduction. A couple things. One, you kind of talked about your Twitter, and that's one of the reasons I've wanted to have you on the podcast for a little while now is you do a great job of kind of creating these threads that break down how a deck can be played. And that's been very helpful for me, and I think for a lot of other people. I've seen your breakdowns. I've gone and built the deck, and I read, okay, turn 1, this is what I want to be accomplishing turn 2, and it's helped me a lot. So definitely appreciate that. Second thing I just wanted to call out, I am also a big Marvel fan, love the Marvel IP, and that I never really played Hearthstone. So everybody's like, Ben Brode, this is a game from Ben Brode, and that didn't really speak to me. I mean, it does now. I think Ben Brode seems like a great guy and a great game leader. But for me, it was the Marvel and the card game piece. But going along with that, just want to call out to everybody listening, Ant-Man tickets for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, the new movie, went on sale last night at the time of recording this. So if you haven't got your tickets yet and you want to go see it, make sure to grab them now. I got tickets for me, my friends, and my family to go see it opening night. So very excited for that. Okay, well, we will dive into the topics here now, and we will start off with card. So we were debating a little. I shouldn't say debating. We were talking about how to pronounce the name before the show, and it's either Shanna or Shauna, the she-devil. So we will probably say Shanna for the recording here, but maybe you pronounce it Shauna. But Shanna, the she-devil, is a 4-cost, 2-power card on reveal. Add a random 1-cost card to each location. And I just want to clarify that says to each location. It's not to every other location. Like if you play in one location, the cards go to the other 2. It's all 3 locations. If there's space available, will be filled by one random 1-cost card in each location. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds right to me, yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, so we'll be talking synergies here, what cards we think this works well with, but we're getting several cards this month, and I guess my first question for you is just how do you feel this one kind of stands up against the other ones we're getting this month? Things like Sauron, Shadow King. We've kind of broken down these cards just a little bit previously on the podcast, but how do you think this one kind of stacks up against some of the other cards we've got into Pool 6 or Pool 5?
Yeah, so my overall take on this month is this is probably low overall, but the overall power level of all these cards to me is not super high. It's like have their decks what they fit into, and Shanna fits into a deck, so I put her higher than some of the I would actually put her higher than Shadow King, in my opinion, but lower than Sauron. And Dazzler could go so many different ways. So wait and see on her. That's
interesting. So, well, I'm interested to hear your thoughts because I know, some people think, oh, Shadow King, great tech card, right? But it really depends on what you're playing against, right? So, interested to hear your thoughts on, why Shanna maybe kind of goes higher on the stack this month. So, let's just start talking some of the obvious synergies, right? So she's obviously meant to be. I'm not as familiar with the Khazar and Shanna from the comic books or anything, but obviously, kind of that first thing you think of is Khazar. One, the art style's the same. They both have to do with 1-cost cards, and so that's kind of the obvious synergy here that people are going to think of. And that leads us to maybe think things like Blue Marvel, which just kind of gives another buff to all cards. So it's kind of like, okay, you're filling the board, Kazoo style deck, and you're buffing all these cards. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think that's the obvious synergy that we're going to talk about first, but do you think that's actually kind of the best way to play her?
Look, it's definitely the obvious one. I'm not sure if she is 100% the best way, but it's definitely the obvious one, and I think it does elevate Zoo or Flood style decks, even if it might not look like it, and it might look like it clashes with certain cards, in particular with Zabu as well. Zabu obviously allows you to play Kazar and Shanna on the same turn as well, which is potentially super powerful combination. Yes, the obvious application is directly with Kazar, because that's 3 bodies which will all get +1 by the end of the game, and Blue Marvel could obviously add on top of that. Flood style decks I'm very versed in myself. I've played a lot of them and recommend them for a lot of different levels, and she will fit in quite easily into a lot of different builds, I believe, because if considering as a worst case scenario, if you play her in a full flood deck, you've got her on 6 with 2. You could potentially play her with 2 1-drops, for example, on 6. So that's what is that 6 bodies?
Yeah,
and that's a lot. There's a lot of potential burst damage, cold damage because of Hearthstone. Sorry, burst power what you can put on there in 6 without any sort of interventions. That's worst case scenario. Start adding in cards like Zabu, and suddenly her ceiling just gets much higher.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I was going to actually ask you, do you think in a Kazar, Blue Marvel, Flood the Deck style deck, however you want to play that? I mean, there's a lot of ways you can build that deck. I mean, you could throw in Thanos with the stones. Do you think it's like worth it to play her if you don't have Zabu or you don't play Zabu in the deck? Because they're both Kazar and Shanna are both 4-cost cards, right? So, I mean, you said the scenario, right? You could play her and 2 1-cost cards on turn 7, but obviously if you have something like Ebony Maw that you've drawn late, like that doesn't really help you to be able to play at the end. Do you think that strategy is as doable without Zabu in the deck?
Look, it's not as doable. Zabu is obviously going to make her much stronger. It's definitely doable. I would immediately, if I would pull any of my Zoo lists up, I would immediately drop one of the 1-drops and put a Shanna in there instead. Like, this just to give an idea of how much I think she fits in.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these decks, the play style, unfortunately, a lot of people look on curve and looking for the curve and say, oh, it clashes with my 4-drop. You're only going to be able to play one of the 4-drops, and the other one can be a 6 card on your turn 6 with other cards. With the flood style, you actually want the flexibility of when you can play the cards, so you can avoid killmongers, you can give and take priority as you need it. So she actually adds a lot more flexibility than it might look on the surface. But the thing, and it attaches to a lot of conversation which is happening recently, Zabu elevates her significantly though. So if you may feel bad with that approach of just playing her, but if you opened her randomly early on without Zabu, she's definitely playable in that style. I definitely think so.
I think you make a great point that, I fall into this trap myself, is that it's too easy to get caught in the kind of the curve trap where you're like, I have to play on curve and I need to design my deck around a curve. But you're right. I mean, being able, you said it yourself, right? Playing her on turn 6 with two 1-drops, that's 6 bodies on the board, right? And if you figure that like the average 1-drop has 2 power, 3 power, right? Probably closer to 2 is the average you're going to get.
Yeah, it would be average.
That's a lot of power that can be spread across the board, especially if you already have, because you played Kazar in 4 and Blue Marvel in 5, right?
Yes, it's 12 plus, and then it's another 6 at 18, and then potentially another 6.
Yeah.
So it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's more than it might seem.
And one of the things is that this is spread across the board. It's not in one location, right? So you kind of get that Doctor Doom style buff where you can kind of spread it across the whole board. Yet, you get 15 power, which is a lot, but you get to spread it across the board, which can be very powerful to close out a game. So, Well, let's kind of turn to another synergy potential here, and that's destroy. I know there's been some talk and thought there. What are your thoughts on where Shanna could kind of potentially fit into a destroy deck?
With destroy, I'm probably not as high as some on that one. She adds an extra body for a destroy effect. So potentially we're just adding back in. For me, this is my opinion. It potentially she fits with more of the smaller, lower part of the destroy curve. Could be added back into some sort of a zoo flood sort of package. So you're playing the Nova, playing Shanna and Carnage. So when later on in the game you can destroy a bad one drop and then maybe buff some power around the board. But yeah, I worry about the consistency of that one myself, whether it's not the best way to do it. It definitely shows that idea in itself just shows the flexibility around Shanna, which might not be apparent on the surface. That there is more ways to use them bodies than you might immediately think of, and that's where we're going to find the more exciting ways to use this card, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think maybe the kind of the first kind of zoo style deck that we talked about is maybe more powerful. One kind of synergy or combo, I've seen a couple of people talk about is with Killmonger, right? If you're playing the Killmonger, if you play Squirrel Girl and you play Shanna, that's potentially 6/1 cost, right? If you have space to put those all on the board. A Killmonger killing all those, not including anything you maybe have killed with Carnage or anything else. That's 6 hits, and that would be 6 costs reduced on death, right? And then all of a sudden you have a 3-cost death. Obviously, maybe you destroy some 1-cost cards on your opponent's side of the board, etc. Potentially, you could almost get death for 3 or less cost without having to play wave, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth looking at. That's what I mean. Yeah, like I agree with the idea behind that. My counter to whether that's the strongest way to use it would be that you're just leaving a 4/2 when you're using that. So you're missing a lot of the potential power of the card.
Yeah,
by going down that route, and there's a lot of clunkiness what could happen there. But the fact that you can look at them options is where this card might find her surprise value, I think. And I think you mentioned it earlier. For me, the most exciting way to explore this card, like outside of the Flood, is actually as a mini Doctor Doom. Mm-hmm. I think that could be the way that we find something interesting with this card.
Yeah, well, let's talk more on that thought. Things like Storm, Ebony Maw, right? You kind of lock out a location. Obviously, with Ebony Maw, it's for yourself, but maybe you've been able to stack some power there early, and your opponent isn't expecting you to be able to add that little bit of extra power. But something like playing Shanna and then maybe Doctor Doom on turn 6, right? All of a sudden, you could be adding an additional, between the two, you could be adding additional, from 7 all the way up to, if you pulled another Ebony Maw or something, right? Like 12 power to that location. Yeah. In the latter half of the game that your opponent wasn't expecting, right? And so maybe they're not playing around that. Maybe they're just playing to beat the Ebony Maw, not what you could add there later. So Storm is similar, right? But that one, you're obviously locking your opponent out as well, so you have a little bit more of the upper edge there to be able to add power there later in the game.
Exactly. And I think that exact scenario could be the more exciting way to look at the card and trying to find different ways to use her and maybe abuse the effect. And it takes away a lot of the negatives of some of the 1-drops too. Just looking at the 1-drops as well, just to point out that the average is around 2. It's actually only really, there's Ebony Maw in the Hood, which you don't really want at all. Mm-hmm. And maybe Titania could screw you sometimes. But otherwise, the quality of the 1-drops for this sort of effect is much higher than playing something like Debris or Squirrel Girl for this sort of thing too. Yeah. So, and I think potentially over time we might find a way to abuse this, to put the extra power in there, like you said, and surprise people more. And also the location decks, and I think the article that snaps the Dense Point Snap Zone has an amazing build on there as a starting point.
Yeah,
the ability to buff these with Kazar in that deck as well could be something worth exploring if I was to get this card.
Yeah,
what I would be looking at.
Yeah, just like we've kind of said in past episodes for listeners, a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, there are articles about the new cards, the new locations every week on MarvelSnapZone.com. So make sure to go check it out. There's deck builds, ideas to try out if you either you purchase Shanna in your token shop, or if you open her in reserve. So, well, I think we've spent a good amount of time here. I think Shanna is an interesting card. I think one of the things I like about these conversations I have with people that come on the podcast is sometimes I go in thinking one thing or thinking a little bit lower on a card, but kind of having the conversation helps me, generate new ideas and get a little more excited. So I'm interested. I don't think she's one I'm going to spend 6,000 tokens on personally. I'm going to wait for her to drop just so I can target some other cards, but I am excited to play with her when I open her, and or if she drops to a lower, when she drops to a lower collection pool or series, and I'll unlock her then. But let's
she's one of them cards which I would love to open this card and play with it and see what I can do. But yeah, I agree with the token comment around that one. It's a lot of tokens for this effect, unfortunately.
Yep. We do know that cards are going to be moving down every month now, though, so that's a positive. Excited for that. Hey all, I wanted to take a quick moment to talk to you about MarvelSnapZone.com. Marvel Snap Zone is a one-stop shop for everything Marvel Snap on the internet. They have new articles nearly every day that cover deck building, strategy, card breakdowns, etc. They have a great collection tracker tool and a deck list builder that works off of that collection tracker so that you can know what decks you can build with your current card collection. They have guides and deck lists for all level of players and all collection level of players. Make sure to go to MarvelSnapZone.com and check it out now. Let's turn to the location now, which is the Rickety Bridge, or I guess I added, but Rickety Bridge, which reads, after each turn, if there is more than one card here, destroy them. So this is a really spicy one. I think this is very interesting. It's going to be interesting what happens. You actually wrote the article for Marvel Snap Zone on this location, so let's just start talking. What are the things you think people can leverage to really take advantage of this location while it's more prevalent?
So interesting. Like sometimes when I start these articles, I'm not sure where I'm going to go, and this one I started very low on, and then slowly came around to some ways we could potentially abuse it, but then go back full circle. So my number one point with this is just put armor in every single deck you build for 48 hours. It's just going to be better for most strategies to just continue on and try and use armor on the lane and just stop it. Like honestly, and it could be one of them locations which just becomes more interesting when it's not all the time. So that's number one. Number two is the big bad Galactus. For me, is a potential, and it seems to be a potential with every location at the moment, because the way that it reads, if we play a card on there on turns 1 or 2, it's once again in a location which can turn Electro off. If we have a card on there on turn 3, we play Electro on the location, suddenly we have an empty board and 5 energy on turn 4. And with Galactus, you either want priority or an empty board most of the time. And that just increases the ceiling for the card for Galactus. Turn 5, we can then Dr. Octopus on the location, pull all the cards down onto the location. They'll lose all their cards. You lose Doc Ock. But we've then effectively finished their game. And then we play Galactus. Unfortunately, I am once again the Doomsayer with that one. But some more interesting ways that we could look at it as well. It could be seen as a location which just limits where we're going to be putting cards. So maybe there's a chance for my favorite pet projects trying to throw any power on from cards like Mr. Fantastic and Claw. They could maybe have more effect because it might be a place that people avoid. Professor X, be insane. If people are avoiding the location, I just can't get into it early enough. That could just be a free location for us as well. And that could be a way of approaching it. And yeah, really interested to see if people can abuse Dr. Octopus during a location, for example. just one warning with this as well. When you're looking at decks for this, I don't believe that Bucky Barnes Nova is a good plan either. I think that's a bit awkward. But I mentioned this a little bit further in the article on Snapzone. So, but yeah, my number one recommendation would be some sort of a control-y sort of deck using cards like Dr. Octopus, Aero, Professor X to try and abuse the destroy effect on there. Just limit the game for your opponent and then just finish them on there.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. That's kind of what you came to mind. You talked armor, you talked Professor X, you talked Mr. Fantastic, right? And these kind of go into like an ongoing deck. And I think one of the decks you referenced was like a Spectrum Destroyer deck, right? I think that's an interesting one because it's kind of like it's a synergy we know works, right? It's a good deck. But with armor in this location and people maybe trying to take advantage of it in a more destroy way. Oh, I'm going to destroy, I'm going to destroy cards for my death deck, right? Or I'm going to destroy Bucky Barnes there, right? If people try to play these things, you can potentially limit that with armor and with a Spectrum Destroyer deck. You can lock out locations. You can kind of get those extra buffs at the end of the game that your opponent isn't expecting with things like Spectrum. I guess I should say, people often are expecting it now. People are very familiar with the deck, but I think it's just a good quality deck that maybe takes advantage of people trying to, take advantage of this location in other ways. So it's kind of like the counter in some ways, right?
Yeah, and it's got ways it can abuse it as well. So for me, that's the hot, like when I'm going through these locations that you're looking for the archetypes, which can benefit obviously. Then also, if they can benefit whilst also just carrying the cards as part of their normal strategy, then that's just added bonus. And that's why Death and Destroy work so well in so many locations, because it can carry the cards it needs to take advantage, whilst it's also just carries its own game plan forward. So keep in mind when you're looking at locations is what deck do I know has a proven synergy where I can put the cards which take advantage in there, and it actually plays towards my strategy, and usually that's where we end up with the best cards for ones for the location. Try to go a bit off the wall a few times in the article, by the way, so if you do go over there, there's a few different suggestions there too to try out during the time. But I'd be leaning towards the ongoing package more than the destroy package, surprisingly. Galactus if you have it, and more of a control sort of package just to take advantage of the location and have them tools to lock it down when you want to.
Yeah, a lot of great ideas. I don't have Galactus yet personally, but now knowing that they're not going to drop him down from Series 5 for a while, he is the next card I'm targeting, right? I already have Thanos, and just got to get that card so I can get other cards as they drop down. But Rickety Bridge, obviously, it's another destroy location, kind of like we had Altar of Death, but I don't think this will be nearly as wild as Altar of Death personally. Man, that was a fun 48 hours. Personally, I enjoyed it. Yeah, fun. That's the hard thing. And I talked about this last week on the podcast with Brad Safer, but sometimes those locations, Lamentus 1, the Peak, some of these locations that just really play strongly into like a couple of decks. And it can feel really bad if you don't have those cards or you don't understand how to play those decks, etc. It can be really not fun or discouraging to be on the opposing side, but I do have fun when I feel like I have something that works really well with it. I shoot up 10 ranks in one day or something like that. It feels a little good, but I understand that sometimes it can be a little polarizing for players when that 48 hours can feel long if you're losing every game, right? Or you're just not having a good time. So I understand that, but I love locations.
The balance.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I'll go. The balance of this, the featured and hot locations is obviously debated often.
Yes.
And potentially if they need to think more about the variety of locations, because there is really one archetype which every week gets a benefit from these locations and can play into most locations better than some. So people gravitate back to that archetype because they can rely on it, and it can play. It gets advantages, and that's why we end up back with the cycle every week.
Yep.
So maybe it's just the fact they need to do more variety around it. I don't think that dropping the amount of featured time on locations is a good thing, because it adds a lot of variety, and I think we would miss that variety if they stop doing this.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love that Marvel Snap offers so much variety and kind of a mini meta change every week, right? For 48 hours, everybody's trying something a little different, trying to leverage it the best they can, right? And maybe you're trying to play into it to use it as an advantage, or you're trying to play the counter of what you expect others to do. I love that, right? Yes, sometimes it can be a little bit more frustrating than other times, but I love this idea that, like, 2 days a week, we have a new location. We've never played with it before. Maybe we don't fully understand it till we start using it. And then later in the week, we have a location we know, that's featured for one day. And it gives variety throughout the week. So it's not just like, okay, locations are always going to be the same, and you're going to see the same locations on the same average amount of time, and it's just the same old, same old. So definitely appreciate that as part of the kind of the design philosophy with Marvel Snap.
I think we would miss it more if it was gone.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay. Well, Rickety Bridge, interesting location. We'll see what people are posting on Twitter, Discord, etc. about the location over the next couple of days. Be interesting to see how people like it. Continuing on, I wanted to go into a topic that we haven't done a ton of on the podcast. We've done things in the past like deck face-offs. We have different creators come on, they build decks, and they break it down for us, and we kind of have the audience vote. We haven't done that for a little while. Maybe we'll pick that back up, but I've had listeners reach out to me and say, I would love for you to have people on to talk about decks they're using and how to use them. Sometimes people see decks, pictures that people post on Twitter, Discord, wherever, or Reddit, and say, this is the deck that got me to Infinite, but they don't really give context of how to play it, how to best leverage it. And you recently had an article go up a couple of days ago at the time of recording with one of the decks. I think it's the main deck you kind of got your last stretch to Infinite with. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of break that down for the listeners, how they can use it. And quickly, before you do that, I'll read kind of the list of cards with the abilities, just for people that may not be familiar with some of these cards. Just to give a little context. And you have two builds of this. You have one with no Series 4, Series 5 cards, and one with them. I'm just gonna read out the Series 4, Series 5 one. So we start off with Zabu, no 1 or 2 cost cards. We start with Zabu, a 3 cost 2 power card that lowers all of your 4 cost cards by 2. Then we go to Lady Sif, which is a 3 cost 4 power card, which discards the highest power card, or the highest cost card in your hand. Then we go to Dracula, a 4 cost 0 power card. At the end of the game, after the game is ended, it will discard a card from your hand and gain the power of that card. We have Jubilee, which is a 4 cost 1 power card that pulls a card from your deck to the location where Jubilee is played. Shuri is a 4 cost 2 power card, which doubles the power of the next card you play. Absorbing Man is a 4 cost 3 power card that, if the last card you played was an on-reveal ability, it copies that on-reveal ability and does it again. Ghost Rider is a 4 cost 3 power card that brings a card you have discarded randomly, if you've discarded more than one card, to the location that it's played from your discard. Spider-Man is a 4 cost 3 power card that locks down your opponent's side of a location the next turn after it's played. America Chavez is a 6 cost 9 power card that is guaranteed to be drawn on the last turn, or on turn 6 of a game. Magneto is a 6 cost 12 power card that moves 3 and 4 cost cards on your opponent's side of the board to that location. Giganto or Giganto is a 6 cost 14 power card that can only be played on the left location on the board. And the Infinite is the last card. It is a 6 cost 20 power card that can only be played if you didn't play any cards last turn. We've got a third of our deck is 6 cost, half the deck is 4 cost cards, and then we have 2 3 cost cards. So interesting. I think this style of deck, when you see kind of no 1 2 cost cards, people probably get nervous, a little intimidated. So that's why we've got you here to break the deck down for us.
So look, the deck has been, my version of this deck's been getting built for quite a while, and I've played it a version which didn't have before Zabu. And I remember Coco dropping in, Coco 4, great streamer, you should follow him. He dropped into when I was playing and showed me his Zabu list. Reminded me of my old Jubilee list, and this came out pretty spontaneously from there. And it's been having great success for a lot of people. And I've seen a lot of different creators as well have different versions out there, but it follows a similar sort of structure. And I don't like to write the full article onto Marvel Snap Zone unless I have a point that I'm trying to make as well in there. So I really do encourage anyone who's really interested to take a go through the article as well. It goes into a bit more detail about why it's built in such a way. But the 1 and 2 cost cards, they're not there on purpose. They make our high rolly cards, well, high roll in air quotes, because I don't believe they are. They make the other cards worse if I have the 1 and 2 cost cards in there. So there is a reason they're removed. And a lot of time you'll see this sort of deck with Sunspot as a bit of a trade-off. So you've got a card to potentially play on 1. But I like to stick to the strategy here and found it was better to cut them entirely in favor of I play Zabu on 3. That's the plan. Now, I don't want to shy away from that. This deck it does not work in this way without Zabu. You need Zabu to work. But there is way you don't need the other series 4 and 5 cards which are featured in my main list. But the goal is to try and make sure that Jubilee in particular is as good as possible on 4 after a Zabu. So if we play Zabu on 3, Jubilee obviously then becomes a 2 cost card which pulls a card out. If we have 4 to 6 cards we would like to pull in the deck, then the bad outcomes are minimized significantly. So if we end up at a case where the only bad outcome from Jubilee is Ghost Rider, then our odds of hitting the card we want are very high. And that's the whole goal of the deck, and why it might look random when you're playing against it. You're like, oh, look how lucky he pulled his Infinite. But in reality, it's built in such a way to try and avoid the negative outcomes. And the 4 drop cards around it, like Spider-Man, Absorbing Mind, Shuri, are my favorites, and Ghost Rider, obviously, we'll talk about him separately. My favorite ones because if they come out, Absorbing Mind, there is a slight anti-synergy if he comes directly off Jubilee. But if they come out, they often give me an effect which I can use afterwards, and it benefits me in some way, which is why they're there. And then that just limits the bad outcomes more.
Interesting. Yeah, I think,
cool.
I've played against decks that are like this or kind of look like this. And yeah, like you say, sometimes I'm kind of like, oh, this kind of feels like they're trying to do multiple things, like the Lady Stiff with Ghost Rider and Dracula. Like you're trying to discard these big cards, resurrect them, or, in a couple different ways. And then you kind of have the Shuri to like grow a card like larger. So it can feel, but I think you make a lot of great points that this really is about basically what you said with 1 and 2 cost cards, right? Because whenever I've seen something like this, they almost always have like a couple, like probably 1 or 2 1 and 2 cost cards, right? And that is to like quote unquote fill the curve, right? So you're not wasting turns 1 and 2, and this is all said in air quotes, right? Because that's how I think it's easy, and it makes sense why people think that, right? With a game that only has 6 turns normally, if you're not playing anything on 33% of the turns, like it's like you think, how could that be good, right? But obviously we have the snap mechanic, we have the retreat mechanic, right? If the game isn't going in your favor, you can retreat and kind of move on to the next card, or the next game, I should say. But when you kind of pull some of these key cards with Zabu, Lady Sif to be able to kind of start things going on turn 4, you're kind of set up for having success, is kind of how you said it, for being able to high roll more frequently.
Yeah, so it might look like a high roll. That's what I'm trying. I kind of want to go back to. With the Hella deck, for example, is a high roll. Yeah, that you need them in a certain order. And that's why that sometimes feels really frustrating to play against as well. But if you've played this deck or play a similar deck like this, you've controlled the outcomes in the deck building. Your outcomes are quite restricted. We could look at Jubilee, for example, and in reality, as long as if Ghost Rider's in your hand, especially, she becomes a 4-10 on average, and that's a big stat line.
Yeah.
And in reality, the random is not really there because we've removed the 1 and 2 drops. And I'll say something else on that because obviously people do get nervous about that with decks, and I really go back over that point. If your turn 1 and 2 only add 4 power onto the board, but then your turn 3 and 4 add 20 power to the board because you don't have the 1 and 2, and the trade-off for me is worth it sometimes. But if you were nervous, adding a sunspot does work as well. Just to go back.
but it is a probability game. I mean, right? Because for every sunspot in the deck, then it's one less chance to pull the other key cards you want, right?
Exactly. So you want to limit when you're building to these sort of decks. You want to limit the negative outcome happening to you. You build in a way where if I pull that card, am I going to be happy about it? If I go through this list, if they're in the deck, there's only if Jubilee is the first 4 drop I play, then there's 2 bad outcomes for me, which is Absorbing Man and Ghost Rider. I've done nothing else before.
Yeah.
So the chances of me hitting a bad outcome are actually quite low. They do happen.
Yeah.
And
it's going to happen occasionally, right? And maybe those are the games you retreat, right?
The odds are in my favor. Shuri might look like a bit odd as well. I just want to put. I'll quickly talk about Shuri. She's just the best. She's, in my opinion, probably the best 4-drop in the game in a lot of ways because of what she does. If you play Shuri as your last card on 5, America Chavez, for example, then becomes 18 power on 6, and she's always coming on 6, for example. That's your worst case scenario, or one of the worst case scenarios. But if you play Shuri on 5 before a Spider-Man, a 6-power Spider-Man can actually win a lot of lanes in himself. So you've got to think a bit like it might look like a bad outcome, but is it actually a bad outcome? Is a 6-power Spider-Man more likely to lock down a lane than a 3-power Spider-Man? Yes. So, that's basically the logic behind how the deck was built. But something, Lady Sif and Ghost Rider, I want to touch on them too because they look like a minor anti-synergy. I added them because of I don't have Darkhawk, and I want to talk about that maybe slightly if I can. Sometimes not having a card is an opportunity to try and look for another solution which might be as powerful or more powerful even. So I didn't have that card. I don't have the card and still will likely not have him for some time. So I had to look at a different 2 set of cards. So Lady Sif, Ghost Rider, anyone who played through beta knows how good that combination was when they could be played on the same turn. Zabu obviously enables them to be played in the same turn again because Ghost Rider becomes a 2-power card, a 2 energy card, and Sif is free. So that can be your turn 5 in itself. If we miss on Zabu, Lady Sif sits on turn 3, pulls a card, and then we've got a Ghost Rider ready to go at any time later in the game, which will be most likely at least 12 power at that point because Chavez stays in your deck. You're likely to draw Magneto, Giganto, Infinite before you play Sif. So the chances are that it's a very powerful play just by itself. So that's why them 2 cards are there. And just be careful you just have to be careful about the order you play Lady Sif and Ghost Rider a little bit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So taking this for me, I mean, this is not like the style of deck I normally play. And I have, at least on the build we're talking about, I have everything except for Shuri. Okay. So I know you've got a couple replacement cards in kind of a non-Series 4, Series 5 deck, Rescue and Crossbones, but you also mentioned Zabu, which I actually do have. So kind of looking at my option, for example, right? So like I have Absorbing Man, but I guess my question is like, if I don't have Shuri, is it worth, in your opinion, taking out Shuri and Absorbing Man and putting in Rescue Crossbones, throwing in Zabu? We'll do a little deck crafting with me here. What do you think would be the best option for me to try this out without having Shuri?
I would definitely still keep Absorbing Man, just to be clear. Absorbing Man elevates the deck significantly, regardless. Now, the reason Shuri, actually, just to circle back, part of the reason Shuri is still in there is because you can carry the effect over with Absorbing Man. So there's a bunch of good on reveals. But Absorbing Man is primarily there for double Jubilee or double Spider-Man, which are two incredibly strong plays.
Yes.
Just so like if we've limited our bad outcomes in Jubilee so much due to the way the deck's built, having two of them increases even better, even more, and you can play them both in the same turn. So Absorbing Man is, if you've got Absorbing Man, you play Absorbing Man always. Shuri is not even a requirement for anyone, like in my opinion. You could take her out if you just don't like that playstyle and you don't like the idea that Shuri could stuff up your plays. I think it adds a higher ceiling to the deck, but if you pulled Shuri for any good 4-drop, it would be a good play still. The reason that I have them two, in particular, Rescue and Crossbones, as my main recommendations to replace the two cards. Crossbones is 4/8 start line, outcome off Jubilee if he's pulled from Jubilee as well. You can likely be guaranteed of being ahead on a lane at least by turn 5 or 6, so he's usually going to be playable. So that's why Crossbones is there. It's just the highest DOS 4/8, so it's also a Jubilee consideration. And Rescue is my preference over Jessica Jams because it doesn't limit where you can play the next turn. So Rescue into Spider-Man is a potentially really strong play. It's like a pseudo sort of Rescue into Professor X play. So why I would choose Rescue. And if you pull Rescue from Jubilee, there's you easily play a card there to get that extra buff later on as well down the line. So I would start with Rescue because I think it's easier to play than Crossbones. There's less restriction on how you play your earlier turns, but Crossbones would probably be what I would prefer to have in that spot.
Yeah. Now for somebody who does have Zabu, do you think Zabu would go over Rescue or Crossbones?
Zabu is still in there, even though there's no Series 4 and 5. Sorry, Michael.
Wow, yeah.
It's still a Zabu deck.
I said Zabu. I meant Darkhawk. My bad.
Darkhawk. Oh, yes. No. Yeah, Darkhawk is good. So I'll go back to how the deck started. If you were to remove Shuri for just Darkhawk, it would be good by himself, I believe, because it's a 1/7. A 4/7 in most circumstances. But the very, very original version of this deck also had Rock Slide.
Yeah.
So you take Ghost Rider out and put Rock Slide, and you take Sif out for any other 4-drop you like, and that was the deck which came before it, and it's still very strong.
Awesome.
But I think this conversation shows like how you can change decks as well.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it's really a case of trying to fit your collection into the styles. When you see something on Twitter or anywhere, have a think about what you can do to change it yourself, and you can end up with your own versions of decks. And it's kind of one of the nice things about Marvel Snap, as much as it can be frustrating when you don't have all the super powerful cards.
Yeah, I mean, you stream. I'm sure you've seen this. Some of the classic things we see are people saying, what card can I switch to this card if I don't have it? Or people sometimes feel frustrated. You're like, I don't have the cards to play the meta decks. Now, I think we can challenge that a little bit, right? Because, I can say, I don't have Shuri. I can't play this deck because, that's how they played it and they had success, right? It's easy for me to say that, but you and me just had a conversation there. We named 3, 4, 5 other, options that we could switch out a couple cards here based on what I have and could still play a very strong deck.
Exactly. And it's a question I get daily, every day. I get a question from someone saying, what can I swap in for X, Y, or Z? And there's always an answer. Sometimes it makes the deck significantly different. Sometimes it's like to like-ish. Sometimes you should just swap the card because you like a certain card more than the other. As one thing I would just say to everyone is if you just like a certain card more, or there's a certain part of the playstyle you don't like, no one is stopping you. And you should just put the card that you like more in, is what I would say too.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Well, we're just about out of time, but I did want to give a shout out to a couple of things. I'd recently started a Twitter thread just a couple hours before this recording on January 17th. And just a reminder, the Twitter for the podcast is at can't_stop_snap. Just ask if there's any topics or questions you'd like answered on the podcast. We're going to continue to have great guests on. SafetyBlade, we hope to have you back on again. And really would just love to hear the topics that the community and the listeners would like to have discussed with different creators on the show. But before we go, SafetyBlade, just want to give you one more chance. Just let people know where they can find the content you're putting out online, where they can find you streaming, so that they can best support your content.
So I'm primarily findable on Twitter at SafetyBlade_HS. That's where it all started. And I love to interact with people's questions and queries on there. Also, I'm always open to talking on Discord about things as well. Very accessible in that way. And one of my favorite parts about this game is actually just trying to solve problems and build decks and stuff. So feel free, please reach out. And my articles go up on Snapzone weekly. I usually do the locations and some of the new cards. And when I have something interesting to say about a deck in a bit more long form, you'll get articles like this one. So just please check out Marvel Snap Zone, go to the articles sections, have a read through, and that's it really. Trying to get a schedule together to get online a little bit more on Twitch and be a bit more of an amateur in that regard. So follow me on Twitter, and if I can get something set up properly there, you'll be the first to know too.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being on. We hope to have you back again at some point, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much.
Listeners, we will be back next week with another episode to break down new cards, new location, and discuss interesting topics that you would like to hear us discuss. So make sure to go check out that Twitter thread and let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about. With all that being said, we thank SafetyBlade for being here again, and we will catch you in the next episode. Can't Stop Snapping is a podcast written, recorded, produced, and hosted by Michael Thurman. Thanks for listening.